Thank you so much for those generous words, and really it's a delight to be with all of you this morning. I apologize that we've got off to a late start, that you were asked to reorganize your schedule a little bit to accommodate. You know, I'm delighted that you're in my constituency, but precisely because you're in my constituency, you've come to a place where there are multiple demands on my day, and I truly apologize that I've kept you all waiting, but it's wonderful to see you all here in beautiful Thiruvananthapuram, in one of the best halls actually for this kind of event. So wonderful, welcome to all of you. And I must say that educationists are amongst my favorite people, and seeing all of you here from the ICSC and ISC schools across the country for your 65th annual conference of the Association of Schools for the Indian School Certificate, this has been very satisfying for me, because 5 years ago I addressed the same conference. I hope some of you will remember that. It was in Jaipur in 2017, and it was for me greatly satisfying as an ISC student myself to come and address you all, and now to welcome you all to my own constituency is doubly satisfying. It makes this occasion all the more special. Now, what I'm planning to do is to speak for only half the time allotted to me, so that I can interact with you the other half of the time. I think it'll be far more interesting for all of us if you can ask questions or make comments on what I have to say, so that I can respond to you both as one of your people, but also as somebody who has served in the past as a minister in the education ministry, and I have some personal thoughts as well that may be of value as we focus on each other. So I'll try and keep the formal part of my lecture fairly brief. I have some notes, but I will improvise as I go along and shorten as well, so that we can have more of an interaction. Now, in the 5 years that have passed since our paths last diverged, a lot of things have changed, especially on account of recent factors and forces that in many ways have fundamentally altered the school education landscape in our country. I think it's safe to conclude that one of the biggest challenges for all of you must have been the COVID pandemic. For me, that looks like a chapter that for now appears mercifully to have reached its conclusion, but during its dominance of our lives for about 2.5 years, we had unprecedented hardship and distress in the school communities. And it presented unique and formidable challenges in the education ecosystem, not only for us, but across the world. For the major portion of the last couple of years, all of you have had actively to contend with disruptions to the academic calendar and limitations on the physical spaces and the physical gatherings that you were able to conduct because of the lockdown and other restrictions imposed by the virus. At the same time, in many cases, our school administrations were forced to make a leap towards digital learning and instruction overnight, which is certainly not an easy feat, especially when you put yourselves in the shoes of a teacher who has to command the interest and the attention of the students and educate them in such a manner that can compensate for their physical absence and the lack of this kind of face-to-face interaction that we are having today. In other cases, we often saw that otherwise excellent teachers struggled to make the shift to online classrooms due to their own limited understanding of how to use the technology, and the fact is that navigating the technology requires a significant change. You can't blame the teachers. A change requires time to recalibrate and learn how to conduct such classrooms, and under normal circumstances such a change might have been able to be introduced in a phased manner, but when the virus was followed so abruptly by a lockdown and all the other restrictions, even that kind of training and phasing was not possible. The push to digital classes naturally affected all our students, especially those belonging to marginalized and financially vulnerable communities. Just as our societies have been confronted by historic dividers of poverty and inequality, the push towards greater digital activity also exposed the strong, unfortunately persisting digital divide in our country. While arguably thanks to progressive ruling coalitions, a place like Kerala, highly educated population, strong civil society stakeholders, here in Kerala, this was perhaps arguably less of a challenge than in some other states. There still were, even in Kerala, barriers to digital penetration and access to technology that the government had to struggle to recognize and deal with. As a result of these barriers, certain groups, marginalized communities, financially vulnerable families were naturally disproportionately affected by the push towards a digital ecosystem. And there have been now a number of reports that have come out. I suspect that some of you as principals have come across these already, that the sudden push towards digital learning has left a number of our students and their families in considerable distress, particularly because in these cases they either do not have the technology or the resources to ensure the necessary internet connectivity for these students. So I'll give you one tragic story that I've never forgotten. It happened in the first year of the pandemic. It was a Dalit student in I won't name the school or district in Kerala, but it was headline news when it happened. This girl was so brilliant, she had come first in class throughout. She had now reached class 10. When the lockdown came, the virus came, and suddenly everything moved online. But she was the daughter of a daily wage laborer. And the daily wage, as you know, immediately stopped. With the lockdown, no one could go and get work each day. So this family's income literally went to zero. There were, of course, emergency relief supplies being offered by charities. But the family didn't have any internet connection at home. The government, after some public protests about this kind of problem, started offering classes in government schools on a television channel called the Victor's channel. But this poor family only had a black and white TV which had broken down, and when you don't have enough money for essentials, you're not going to spend money repairing the TV. So this girl, who had been her class topper, found all her other classmates ahead of her and she was completely out of her depth, and this girl committed suicide. She hanged herself. When this sad story broke in Kerala, there was major outrage. Many of us were taken up. As an MP, I conducted a campaign to try and get mobile phones donated, so that at least on mobile phones people from really poor families could follow classes. But it was a reminder, an illustration of how major the challenge of just getting internet access in our society is for some poor people. Now, in the context of all the conversations that we've been hearing about revitalizing education, it's worthwhile not to forget these developments merely because one can see them as an aberration in a particular period of our history. Because frankly, pandemics can come back again. And online education and ed-tech in any case has got a major boost with the pandemic. Some have been arguing, not just in India but abroad, that this should be the future of education. On the one hand, it seems to me that educators and policymakers cannot overlook such tragic realities because of the inequalities that truly exist in our country and in many countries. And I wanted to say that because of that, we should not be swayed by the current trend of investors chasing this idea that education should go more and more online. I'm told that from a mere $350 million in VC investments, venture capital investments into this space a decade ago, funding in ed tech, as it's called, educational technology, has seen in India $6.1 billion being pumped in by investors. And there is even talk of another 30 billion coming in the next 10 years. With online coaching classes mushrooming, the so-called massive open online courses or MOOCs being promoted, gaining popularity, particularly for the college levels. Many have suggested that the future of the classroom is in doubt, and then education may have to go largely digital. I am frankly a skeptic. I'm very honest about this, even though I am not anti-technology, I'm not a Luddite. I'm very happy to adopt new technologies in my own life and work whenever they come. But I do believe that the face-to-face experience in school is irreplaceable. And you'll be surprised that a major technology figure like Bill Gates agrees with me. He said the same thing. We saw thousands of so-called rising seniors, that is class 12 children in America and Western countries, refusing to go straight to college during the pandemic, at least during the first year of the pandemic. They chose instead to take a so-called gap year, rather than having to experience university life online. And at the same time, of course, no university campus reduced the fees. So you have to pay handsomely for the university experience, and you're still sitting at home and listening to your classes. So people said, why should we do that? So I would argue that online education is okay as a supplement, but not as a substitute for teacher learning. Now, we must also understand that digital learning does offer some opportunities. And I don't want to deny that, but a careful balance must be struck between the allure of the digital classroom and the recognition of existing realities in India of barriers to access, to hardware, to software, to internet connections, broadband, and even to electricity in many parts of our country. Perhaps not ICSE schools, I don't know what all your experiences are, but certainly government schools very often. I remember, my ministership is already 9 years ago, but when I was minister, there was a situation where when there was some enthusiasm for adding online classes in government schools, we said, okay, let's do that. And the government school said, very good, sir, but we don't have electricity most of the time. So then we decided to give them generators. Generators, of course, require fuel to run. And what these schools would do is that they would use up the fuel for the generators whenever they had some VIP visiting and so on to have some function. And when the electricity was needed to receive a class online, there was no longer a functioning a functioning diesel generator available to them. So these are the kinds of basic challenges we still have in our country. Where are we talking about going completely online? I don't understand it. And remember that we cannot afford to create a gap between the privileged and the marginalized, between the kind of inequality that inevitably would result if education, which is a means to empowerment for all our children, is going to be at a different level, a different set of opportunities for those who have the means versus those who don't. We cannot revitalize education, to use that cliche, if it promotes the disenfranchisement of the weakest in our society. And that, to reimagine the educational space that way, would be a disservice to our nation. Now, let me say there are challenges of quality as well as challenges of equality. When we are looking at a more equitable education space in the future, we must pay attention to the quality of education that we provide to our students. I've consistently argued that the purpose of our education should not be towards producing children with well-filled minds. Some of you may have seen my speech on YouTube, I think, on this. It's been going around for some years now. But the well-filled mind theory of education was arguably out of date when I was a student. It is completely irrelevant in the 21st century, when you can find any fact that you have not learned with 2 clicks of a mouse. It seems unnecessary to scram our children's heads full of facts and details and information that they memorize for the sake of passing an examination and usually forget immediately after. That is not what education is. Instead of a well-filled mind, we should be producing a well-formed mind. And that is something that we don't do enough of in our Indian systems. Let me illustrate the challenge of creating a well-formed mind by explaining that it is the need of the day, because a well-formed mind is a mind that remains an educated mind even after it has forgotten everything it learned for the examinations. When we are talking about today, I want to cite to you an Oxford Martin study that said that by 2030, 30% of the jobs in the world will be jobs that do not exist today. 30%. How do you prepare children for a job that doesn't exist today? Very simple. You don't teach them what to think, you teach them how to think. And that is ultimately got to be the leitmotif of all that you do in education. Teach children how to think so that when the unfamiliar problem comes, their mind is equipped with a way to approach it and to tackle it. Teach them how to think so that when a new job is created that didn't exist today, they're not completely flabbergasted because it was not in their textbook, didn't come in the exam. They have to understand that life is also an exam, and life constantly asks questions that we couldn't prepare for last year on the basis of the year before last examination papers. You absolutely need to have a mind that is able to deal with unfamiliar facts and information, synthesize them, see patterns, see solutions, and move effectively forward. Our students will have to go on to form the next generation of citizens and leaders of our country. They have to, therefore, be prepared to solve problems in our increasingly complex and challenging world. And we, as Indians, need a sustainable, just, and prosperous future. This requires critical thinking in all disciplines, whether it's science, whether it's humanities, technology, whatever it may be. And because many of these will be problems that don't exist today, a capacity for innovation, for problem solving, for risk-taking, and for out-of-the-box thinking must be carefully nurtured amongst our students. There cannot be a greater priority than this for all of you. Now, at the same time, many educational experts, and I knew one of them whose work many of you may be familiar with, he was at Harvard and then Reimagining at some other university now in America, but a professor of Indian origin, who's done a lot of his research in Indian schools. He has argued that our school education is still afflicted with toxic combinations of inequalities, rote learning, and low practical skills. And therefore that Indian students are struggling to make use of their educational skills in today's world. This is not a small matter. I mean, many of you are familiar with the so-called PISA test, which established that most Indian 5th standard children are reading and comprehending barely at 2nd standard level. There is a real problem in what we're teaching and how we're teaching. A recent study of government schools in Delhi provided some shocking details that says that the average student in Delhi is up to 4.5 years behind the appropriate competence for their age, and any given grade actually has learning levels amongst the students that span 4 to 5 grades. So if you take somebody, say in class 7, the class topper might be somebody who is at class 7 level, and the person at the bottom of the class might be at class 3 level or class 2 level. That is what the educationists have established. When children are so far behind, pouring investment into schools doesn't help. Children who are in the lowest third of test scores actually make no progress at all during the study year. And this is all coming out of academic studies. I'm not making this up. This is not an instinctive or personal evaluation. I've read reports that have said this by academics. Student ranking systems, many in pedagogy are now saying that ranking systems do more harm than good. I perhaps was fortunate in that I went through a system where ranking systems reinforced my self-esteem because I came first in class throughout my life. That doesn't mean that the chap who came 30th was any worse than me in whatever it took to succeed in life. But it must have been a severe blow for his self-esteem as he went through the school experience. And I think we should really ask ourselves, isn't it more important for us to evaluate how our students are progressing in terms of their own previous performance, in terms of their own previous comprehension, rather than comparing them to some other student who may be gifted in a different way? from this one. I think there's increased emphasis, and it should be so, on pedagogy over theory, and there should be more significant teaching and learning, even if it means reducing our very, very demanding curriculums. And I certainly was convinced when I was minister that we increasingly need to identify children who are not cut out for intellectual work, but may have other gifts and talents that the school system does not recognize. Whether it's through vocational training, whether it's through sports opportunities, music opportunities, there are so many different talents children have, but because our school systems focus so much on only evaluating their examination results and marks in the classroom, we might be failing to develop the talents that people have to offer. And increasingly in government schools, I believe a vocational option must be brought in. I don't know how many of you are aware that in government schools in India today, the dropout rate in class 8, after class 8, is 57%. 57, that is much more than half the children in government schools do not continue past class 8. That is the reality, particularly in northern India. Now, what are we doing for these children? If we can somehow catch them before they disappear from the school ecosystem and offer them vocational classes, maybe they would come. And maybe we can actually produce people who are gifted carpenters and plumbers and so on, or whatever else, lathe operators, drivers, mechanics, rather than letting them rot in a system that is not equipped to take care of them. I am very curious, by the way, during our interaction, many of you have comments on the so-called new National Education Policy, the NEP. That's supposed to be the new fundamental policy framework which will guide and shape our education ecosystem. It's something which obviously interests me a great deal. When I was in the Education Ministry, or as it was very clunkily called in those days, the Human Resource Development Ministry, I think it's wise they renamed it Education. I think what's essential is that some new elements in the NEP should be welcomed. I'm not happy that the issue wasn't discussed properly in Parliament, but for example, industry education interface that they have actually now foreseen is something that's very common in many Western countries, certainly in the American system. But in India, we just don't have enough of that. Because when young people are coming out of their degrees, this is not so much for you as school teachers, I was starting to realize that educated unemployment in India is actually 3 times the level of the uneducated unemployed. So people are coming out with education qualifications and not finding jobs, which shows that our system is not geared to the real world. We need to have much more connection with the real world, the world of employment, the world of usable practical skills. I also like the fact that in the NEP there's much less separation between different streams. I do believe that our rigid separation between arts and science doesn't do anybody any good. I know it's practical for schools who always had it. I myself went through streaming. My sisters and so on all went to ISC schools. They all went through streaming. But the fact is that if we can create a core curriculum that everyone must know, which is some elements of the humanities and some elements of the sciences, and then allow people to specialize in what they're good at and what they're interested in, we would actually be doing our own country a service in producing better, rounded citizens from our school system. But at the same time, there are some challenges in the NEP that I would be dishonest not to put before you. One is that, we've been hearing about this goal of spending 6% of GDP on education. We've been hearing it was first articulated in 1946, 48, I beg your pardon, just after independence. And yet, our government seems to believe that it's a great milestone moment for them to announce 6%. They have not actually got anywhere near 6%. In real terms, education spending has declined over the last 6 years in our country. And this does not augur well for setting these goals and not fulfilling them. As we saw during the presentation of last year's budget, rather than increasing allocation for the education sector, we have seen, in fact, a decrease. And overall allocations to the Ministry of Education only constitute 2.67% of the government's overall estimated expenditure for the financial year. Now, that simply isn't good enough. And on top of that, if you look at the overall total expenditure in education as a percentage of GDP, it's 3.5. So 6% is a long way away. It's almost double what we're actually spending in our country. So restating a 70-year-old policy goal isn't enough. To my mind, the government must tell us how it plans to raise the expenditure percentage in education when education has clearly not been a priority for them. Now I realize that all of you from ISC and ICSE schools are clearly largely in the private sector. I don't suppose any of you has the problems of what the government is going to give you. But the truth is that all of these things set the ecosystem. There's not enough money coming in from the government, there's not enough money coming into research, there's not enough standards being set in this field. We will end up in a situation in which the education infrastructure of the country would be weaker, and that means that, of course, the policy will also reflect that weakness. The other problem I have, for those of you who have been thinking about the NEP as a policy goal, is that many of the targets set in the NEP are totally unrealistic. NEP is targeting 50% gross enrollment ratio in higher education and 100% in secondary school. Now, how can these sky-high numbers be met when education spending is declining and when we are very far from these targets? Given that the current gross enrollment ratio, as per the ASDR report 2018-19, the last one I was able to see, I don't think it's gone up very much since then, is only 26.3%, which had gone up from 19.4% a decade earlier. So increasing by less than 6 years in a decade. And the GER for males is stagnating. Thank God more women are coming into higher education. But the truth is that there was a target of 30% enrollment by 2020, and we have not met it. So doubling that target by 2035 seems an unattainable dream. Similarly, research spending. Government spending has actually fallen from 0.84% of GDP to 0.6% of GDP between 2008 and 2018. Again, no recent figures, but the truth is that we know it hasn't gone up. If it doesn't go up, where do you now set new targets to cross 1%? And so, as far as school education is concerned, I'm also concerned about many of the proposals being as vague as they are. Lack of qualified teachers is glossed over. Proposal to create complex clusters of schools, which is a way of trying to avoid the reality of dismal school infrastructure, suggests that we need to focus much more on basics in many of our schools, and then let the schools get on with the job of ensuring learning outcomes. That's where the focus should be. So, the final worry I have is, of course, that in all the centralization implicit in the NEP, the lofty goals being articulated with no mechanism for achieving them, there's also one very worrying development, which is the implied shunting of the bulk of the costs, the financial burden, onto the private sector. Mass affordability is not even an afterthought in the NEP. And let's face it, this is going to be a real problem because a lot of our children in our country, which is still fairly poor, are not going to be able to afford a high-quality private education. So, we must do better by our young people who are eager and hungry for quality education, who are seeking to escape poverty through learning. What do we do for them? To my mind, that is the big mystery we need to address. I'm going to try and stop that because I've raised a few general themes, but I suspect that in the interaction process, we can have much more of a meaningful exchange on whatever is on the top of your mind. So I'm going to conclude there by saying simply, the challenges in our country are great. We have specific India-related challenges that have been exacerbated by the experience of the pandemic, the COVID pandemic, and by some of the under-resourcing of the education system. Some of those may not be your specific challenges, but nor do I think the NEP has necessarily addressed all the challenges that you have. I mean, one interesting thing is the NEP says, for example, that why can't students specialize in both music and mathematics? And that's all very well, but the government is not planning to give any school any additional money to offer both a qualified mathematics teacher and the facility to create a separate room for music instruction. So whichever school is well off enough to have those facilities and whose Parents whose children are well off enough to afford the fees to sustain both of those, they will be able to offer that choice, and I'm glad the choice exists. But what about those schools that don't have it? So as I say, I would like to use the session not only for you to ask me questions and hear what I think, but also for me to hear what you think. So do share with me your own comments on some of the themes I've raised and maybe some of the issues that are on the top of your mind, which I have not addressed, because I genuinely believe an interaction should be a two-way process. I look forward to hearing from you. Thank you for listening to me. Jai Hind. Is someone going around the microphone, Father? Great, thank you.
Before we go into the question and answer session, maybe have a floral to Shashi, Tharoor. May I invite Dr. Swaminathan to go for a floral welcome.
That gives you time to think of the questions. And they don't have to be as flowery as that.
May I request Dr. Devi to adorn him with a shawl. Ladies and gentlemen, we will have 5 questions in all because he is out of time, so we would like to move from here. We are grateful to him for having been here today. He has graced this occasion and then immensely blessed us with his encouraging and motivating words. So grateful to him. So we have 5 questions. The first question is,
good morning. I'm Hema Narayan from Bangalore, an educator from Bangalore. You have the rare distinction, Dr. Tharoor, of being a polyglot politician. When you look at your accomplishments, do you see them in sequence and as a result of perseverance and pursuit, or, forgive me, some privilege and circumstance? I ask this of you because there are many students, many of our schools, who are complacent and who do believe that there is a plan for them made by certain people. If anything, the last 2 years have taught us that these plans can disintegrate along with the people who make them. Thank you.
You're so right. And unfortunately, never was brought up to be complacent. On the contrary, there was very much the sense that one had to strive to be able even to retain the things that one had currently, let alone to enjoy more. And therefore that sense of drive that was instilled in me by my parents from a very young age managed to keep me going. I've never allowed myself, that's just perhaps also partially my own instinct, to rest on my laurels. If I won something or prevailed in something or came first in something, I never thought I made it. I think now I've got to maintain this the next time. How do I work equally hard to maintain that? And therefore, that has driven me throughout. It's in some ways also been a curse because I've been a workaholic all my life. 18-hour days followed because you know you never let yourself go. I don't say no enough. I take on too many obligations and I make sure I fulfill them all. And often at the cost of my sleep and other such pleasures, or entertainment, or other distractions, friendships. But you know, each person is motivated the way they are. But don't let anyone ever think that being born in privilege, for example, or having access to important people and so on, is enough in life. Let them know that as we've seen increasingly in today's world, one of the most striking things is the extent to which the people at the top today do not come from families or backgrounds which were at the top yesterday. It's true in every sector of it. Look at the business world. You take any list, you know, the Fortune 500, or you take the Nifty 100, or all of these indexes. Most of the companies on that list today were not there 10 years ago. And most of the companies that headed these lists 50 years ago are no longer in existence, they're finished. So let children know all the time that they have to bring out the best in themselves. And in any case, there is a peculiar lack of self-respect involved in only trading on the achievements of your forebears. You really do need to have your own so that you can look at yourself in the mirror with pride.
Thank you, sir. We have the second question.
I think you might have two mics perhaps, because there's so many on the stage. Have a second mic going around so people can be ready for this.
Good morning, Dr.
Good morning.
I'm Bela Murthy, Principal of Trio World School, Bangalore.
Another Bangalore, all right.
Sir, coming from Karnataka state, we have a little challenge. As NEP says that in the primary years, that is till class 5, education has to be imparted at the mother tongue level, right? I find it that this is a good suggestion by the central government, the Ministry of HRD or NEP department, but what I feel that a city like Bangalore, which has multilingual children studying in schools, this formula doesn't work well with many schools which are there in Bangalore. So I would suggest that NEP having the mother tongue influence for till class 5 should be reduced and not made mandatory. Maybe it will work for the good for the rural sector, but not for the metros and urban sector.
No, I agree with you. In fact, I think government policy, as far as I had understood, if you were telling me that's not the case, then I would take it up. Government policy was supposed to apply only to government schools in the state sector, so that a state government school in Karnataka would teach in Kannada up to class 5. That was the logic. But that if that cannot be imposed on the private sector exists to offer alternatives to those who are willing to pay for them or able to pay for them and therefore can escape these rules. So I'm surprised. I'll check into how that's done, because the genuine problem is twofold. But there is, first of all, the multilingualism of the children, because any cosmopolitan city will have people of various mother tongue background. But second is the competence of the teacher. If the teacher has been trained to teach in, let's say, English, how is she suddenly going to teach in Kannada, which may not be her most fluent language? And she may be doing a disservice to the students by not being able to explain certain concepts that she has been trained to explain in English, that she cannot now suddenly have to explain in Kannada. So this is a problem, and the government has to, I think, realize that where they have the teachers and they have the capacity and they certainly have the right, they can impose it in the government schools, provided they also offer other languages as second and third languages. But then, those children who can't do it should be allowed to go into a school where they can learn in the language they've always learned. Increasingly, we have people, parents with transferable jobs. So they want a language that their children can study. In whichever state, this is in Bangalore today, and they're in Hyderabad tomorrow, and in Calcutta the day after. They can't suddenly have children learning in Kannada one day, and in Telugu the next, and in Bengali the third. The poor children will suffer terribly. So I think we must have this option of education, especially in the private sector, in one language. Interestingly enough, the Kendriya Vidyalayas are not adopting the mother tongue formula. The Kendriya Vidyalayas, having been designed specifically for central government employees, as far as I know, they're teaching in English and Hindi, and that's it. So, okay, we'll have to see. I'll try and find out more about that. Thank you.
Good morning, Dr. Tharoor. I'm Anirban Roy from DPS Megacity Kolkata, headmaster, and Delhi Public School Megacity Kolkata, headmaster. So before I ask you the question, rather than a question observation, I must express my personal indebtedness to you. So 2013, I was a debutant novelist, and my novel A Black Moon Odyssey came out, and nobody was interested. And due to some fortunate connections, a copy was landed at your table. You took some time and gave me a wonderful review, and that itself, I have never forgotten. And though I've been married to Malayali for the last 26 years, and Thiruvananthapuram is my in-law's place, I never had the opportunity to meet you and thank you in person. So today, that wish is consummated by divine grace. And sir, the question I have observation is that we largely know Dr. Shashi Tharoor as a politician. which is unfortunate, because now India at the cusp of an intellectual renaissance, and we will take over the world. Our students, our teachers, our intellectuals, the fusion of belligerence, the creative aggressiveness, the convictions, the philosophy, the ideologies, the education, but we are about to invade the world and nobody can stop us. And if we have a remarkable figure to look up to, it is this very figure that stands for me. So why don't you, sir, transcend this barrier of politics and come down to education? Because in politics you're an individual, but in education you're an institution. You need no walls, auditorium, you do not need any universities. I have taught students for the last 27 years English, and the very mention of Dr. Shashi Tharoor in any class of 11 and 12 would draw instant attention. Wow, let me listen to the man, what he's talking about. So why don't you come down to school levels, address students, because you are an institution. You just cannot be an individual in politics. I think we demand of the Shashi Tharoor a larger, a broader, a more magnanimous, a more intellectually entitled role in the future. That's about the solution.
Please restrict your questions to questions alone. That will give a lot more time for us.
Okay, well, let me thank the principal very much, and I also want to appreciate his kind words about my support for his writing. I hope he will continue to write. On this, the answer is an event like this one. I'm reaching how many thousands of schools by reaching the principals of those schools. So you can go, and if I've said anything interesting or inspiring, I hope you can in turn translate that into your own leadership in your schools. To be honest, working in public policy gives one an opportunity to try and influence the direction of policy that will help everybody. And education is one of the issues, along with foreign policy, which I've really tried to take a lot of personal interest in and read up about beyond my political work. And I will continue to try and be helpful in this area. I'm glad to have been able to address you after a 5-year gap, and maybe the next time will be also without too long a gap. Thank you all very much.
Fourth question. And we have only 5 questions, please.
There are 2 people waiting in line, it's all right. I'll give shorter answers. Go.
Good morning, sir. Just to change the region, my name is Thiruvananthapuram. I am from the Vidya Valley School, the director, based in Pune. Indeed, a privilege to hear you real time. And I was much taken up by the idea of a well-formed mind in place of a well-filled mind. But the question over here is to the education ecosystem. If we don't change the way we assess the children and ask how and why, then how can we as teachers and educators change the way we teach children? It's very, very difficult to deal with teachers and parents and the way children are taken into colleges. So do help us with that. How do
I agree with you. You know that we did have a policy when UPA was in government for the so-called comprehensive evaluation. Do you remember this, CC? And it was made part of the government's education policy. The pushback we got was from the teachers. They said in other countries, the concept had come from the Western world, where you have classrooms of 15 to 20 children maximum, and often smaller. This is something we can do. But the teachers were saying to me, classrooms of 45, 50 students. I mean, literally, we would not have any time to sort of do anything else or sleep if we had to do the kind of circular, comprehensive evaluation the policy calls for such a large number of students every year. It would literally drive us nuts. And this was a realistic concern that I must say I had to take in my life. I personally believe that, at least in the in-school process, that you can tailor your questions to give much less emphasis on rote learning and much more on understanding. You can set examination questions, and by the way, there are lots and lots of models from Western countries that are now available that do this, which you can actually test the way children think rather than how much they remember. And if you do all of that, even if at the end of the day their final examinations administered by the ASISC or ICSC have not yet caught up with that process, at least you will be able to explain to the children's parents what strengths the child has developed, while at the same time preparing them for the examination. Unfortunately, parents need those marks to get the kid into good college and so on and so forth. It's a tough thing. The onus is on the school and on the teachers and on the principals. And that becomes a challenge, but I think you need to do that to equip them better for the world. And when they succeed in life, they will look back with gratitude on the fact that the school equipped them to think differently, and that those schools have really taught them to literally recite by heart what they've learned from a book or from the teacher's notes. Those products are the ones who are lagging behind in the real world. I think that's something that people may eventually be grateful to.
Thank you, sir. If you could help us with that in the future, I know it's a very, very difficult proposition, but that would be nice. Thank you very much for your time.
Pleasure.
Thank you, sir. Thank you. Have the next question.
Good morning, sir. This is Rajiv. I am from Punjab, sir. So in Punjab, sir, I'm principal of Reimagining Public School, which is right at the border, very close to Wagah border. Yes, sir. So the thing is that in the rural areas of Punjab particularly, majority of the learners, they're very keen to go abroad. And that way school education, even college education, that is getting adversely affected. Indiscipline is very much on the increase. So you have just talked about well-formed mindset. So, I mean, what are those specific points where we need to really dwell upon when we are teaching the students, which can really make their minds well-formed minds and not just well-built minds?
So it's got to be an emphasis on creative thinking and out of the box. Set them situations in the classroom that engage them, and then ask them to react, ask them to enact, as it were, how they would react, and then guide them as to what consequences one kind of reaction would have versus another kind. You see, ultimately, the whole business of education cannot afford to be linked to this is how it is, this is what the book says, this is what the teacher says, you mug that up and you come back and write tomorrow. Because life doesn't work that way. It never worked that way, and it certainly doesn't work that way today. Instead, you should, I think, challenge the kids more by saying to them, okay, here is a particular kind of problem, and relate it as much as possible to their own life. How would you tackle it and why? Make them think aloud. And then when they think aloud, challenge their thinking. Make sure the teacher engages them in a process of getting them to understand themselves and others. And if 3 students come up with 3 different approaches, so much the better, because you can play one off against the other. If all 3 come with the same approach, the teacher has the onus of showing them a different way and saying, why don't you try and think of what are the merits of this. And if they can give you good answers as to why their approach is better than the teacher should say, Shabash, you're right, very good. Now this kind of instruction we don't do enough of in the class. If everyone could do that, it would be fascinating. There are some subjects like mathematics where the answer cannot be changed. That is what mathematics gives you. But the kinds of questions you ask to arrive at the answer, the way in which you relate the questions to real life and so on, all of that encourages more mental engagement on the part of the children than just mathematically, blindly imposing them formulae that they have to learn.
Fine, sir. The question has been answered, but the thing is, they are going abroad for seeking greener pastures there.
That's right.
So, I mean, they feel they will not be able to earn anything here in our own native places. So, if suppose they have got well-formed mind, does it really help them to have something which can really help them for some kind of, for becoming self-sufficient there?
So the question of immigration out of India is unfortunately linked to the government's inability to create employment opportunities in our country. This is something which is now so widespread that we are genuinely facing a problem of not having enough jobs. In fact, you probably know that in 2021, the unemployment rate in India reached the highest ever recorded. Since numbers began to be recorded for unemployment, it's the highest ever. And therefore, I have to say that that is a far bigger problem that cannot be solved by the education system. But for those jobs that do exist in India, and that will be created in India, people with flexible, supple minds are going to have a better chance of doing well in them than people who have just mugged up things by heart. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you, sir. Just last question, and that's to be strict, because I've got reminders from the personal staff of Dr. Shashi Tharoor to be very strict. He has other engagements. Last question, please. Thank you.
Good morning, sir. My name is Radhi. I'm a communication skills trainer from Mumbai, and my question to you is, in a world of social media, we have 2 categories of people. One who message by using emoticons. I think students are forgetting how to express their feelings in words and how to make it more creative. So, as I'm inspired by your communication skills and being a brutally honest politician, where politicians are diplomatic, my question is, should teachers teach English as a subject or as an expression of feelings? That's my question. And should we indulge as teachers and educators more into mindful speaking than in mindless speaking? I think that's with us.
I agree with you. I think the answer is implicit in your question. I think we do need people who can express themselves in all possible ways and communicate what they feel. If sometimes all they want to communicate can be summed up in an emoticon, we may as well let them do it, because that is today's day and age. But you can tell them that drawing an emoticon won't get them any answers in an exam paper or in an academic discussion in college or one day in a job. So it's fine amongst friends, but there is such a thing as having the vocabulary to convey your complex ideas, thoughts and emotions to people who you're not necessarily pals with and who will have to also interact with you in the real world. I think that's something that you have to have them understand, that it's for their interest that they need to learn these things. And yes, I agree completely. Communications, words, there's no real substitute for them. I always end by telling children, whenever I'm in a situation with kids, read, read, read. The more you read, the more you come across words, how well they can be used or how badly they can be used, and you can then figure out for yourself what's the best you can use them for. Thank you all very much. You've been a terrific audience.
Thank you for reminding us that competition for expanding opportunities. One more question, sir.
So one more question from my end. You have been talking about.
I request Dr. P. Joseph Street, Principal Loyola School, to honor Dr. Shashi Tharoor with the memento. Thank you, sir.
Sir, this is about your observations on ADP. I have two questions. What are your observations about the 4-year B.Ed course that's being proposed for teachers? Second thing, you were skeptical about the school complexes. Don't you not think it's a good idea that we get in all the resources available in that region to address the vocational education or liberal arts education?
Very quickly on the school complexes, what I didn't have time to go into detail. What I was trying essentially was to say, it makes sense, for example, that if, let's say, there's a cluster of 8 schools within a 10-kilometer radius, and only one of those schools has a swimming pool, but the schools have a friendly arrangement where they divide up the time, and each school has access to the swimming pool for a couple of hours every day or whatever, and that way you can actually end up using that facility for the benefit of all. I have no problem with that. But a school complex is not a solution if you don't have a toilet for girls in your school. You can't tell a girl, yes, you want to go to the toilet, we'll send you to a school 10 kilometers away when the bus is ready to go for you. So what I'm saying is it should not be an opportunity to excuse a school from having the necessary essential infrastructure. You can do that and have, but that, I'm sorry, I truncated my comment, that's all I meant. What was your first question? 4-year courses, to my mind, it's actually a good thing because that's the global standard. As you know, if you look at most advanced economies, the system is 12 plus 4. So 12 years of formal schooling, 4 years of university schooling, and that makes a BA often enough. No one, relatively speaking, very few people in England, in many universities, the MA is almost a formality. And sometimes there's some universities that will give you a piece of paper saying MA 1 year after you finished your BA, because they feel that what you needed to learn, you learned in your BA. Now, having said that, because in India we've been used to a 3-year BA for a very long time, you could conceivably end up in a situation where you give people the option of graduating with a 3-year BA and call the 4-year BA something else, say for example an honours degree, or call it, I don't know, call it an MA, I don't know, but basically create a situation where there is a differentiation and allow both degrees to continue. But 4-year programs in universities are worldwide the norm, and I think there is no harm in India at least having that option, if not embracing it as a compulsory requirement.